Here we are with the Webway Regionals webcam games. I decided to go first, or I should say I won the dice roll and this Fire Zander mirror matchup. And going off of my hand here, we decided to go ahead and see what we're able to do in turn one without knowing what our opponent had. We went with the sort of the default play of playing our Clumsy Apprentice first. We went with the Clumsy Apprentice first to deal two, draw cards, and then from here we could also either, I think we had the Arthur in hand that I was debating, and we can sit here and create a shock, but I decided to go with one of two Arthurs in hand to set up enough damage to push on turn number two. This is due to the fact of sort of being able to push, let's say, about 4 damage on my turn if my opponent can't deal with it, depending on the deck I'm facing. And we decided to go ahead and pass the turn. And looking at Spirit of Fire, I said, okay, so this could either be a Wind Merlin deck or not Wind Merlin deck, a Fire Merlin or another Fire Zander, depending on the popularity of the decks. But I was mostly thinking at the time of Fire Merlin. And I could deal with Fire Merlin. I could race it down pretty quickly, especially given the fact that my Xander is immortal on the turn it comes in. I could deal with a lot of different things that's sort of going on in pretty much whatever the board state can present itself. So as we were sitting and waiting for our opponent, I'm sort of just really debating on what we're going to set up for my next turn. I have that Creative Shock that we saw in hand. I have an Honorable Vanguard to set up some fast float because more like off the material deck, we're going to go ahead and grab our Quicksilver Rail, but it looks like off the start, our opponent does play Korhazi Courier, attacking our Clumsy Apprentice to kill it. I retaliate for one, not like it does anything too much of significance here. Sorry, I do retaliate for one because of the fact that Arthur is tapped, and Arthur being tapped does give Clumsy Apprentice 2, and we're able to go ahead and trade into Korhazi Courier. So knowing I'm facing Fire Zander going first, this sort of becomes a race against the clock. I go ahead with the default Quicksilver Grail, hiding Poison Dagger underneath. And look at my hand of Korhazi Courier, an Arthur, a Hasty Messenger, an Audible Vanguard, and a Creative Shock. I do see there is a looking at sand from my opponent. I'm trying to debate which will be the best play overall and just try and push as much damage because, like I said, this is a race. I am overall racing my opponent down to try and get to the lethal turn sooner. And I decide to debate between either Korhazi Courier and Creative Shock. And looking between those, debating between the Hasty Messenger as well to draw an extra card if I want to, and get the discard as well as being able to create shock is a little bit more value as a whole. So I decided to go with the Hasty Messenger. I can go ahead and get in for 2 damage on my opponent as well as my regular 2 and filter through my deck to look for my Planet Explosives, Mark to Target, or Rending Flames that can help deal lethal. And we'll go ahead and go through and deal 2 to my opponent as well as there is a Hasty trigger on the stack right now, debating what to discard. I go ahead and discard the Honorable Vanguard so we can have the floating memory in our grave to go up to Xander 1 without being down on cards. And I decided to pass the turn here, 4 cards in hand, because at end of turn I can Creative Shock to filter for something better if I need to. I'm not too worried yet of what my opponent can do, unless I have the better hand that could kill the Arthur, and I'm sort of accepting that Arthur could die at this point. We do have the second Arthur in hand if I need to set it up. It's not ideal, but I'm also just sort of knowing I need to just push damage, and my opponent knowing that I could have a lethal turn next if I go with a default Grail setup. They're deciding to go up to Xander level 1, and they're discarding a Rending Flame off of the banishment. This is sort of good for us, knowing that there's a lethal target out of their hand already. And just sort of debating what else could happen. My opponent's glimpsing 2. There's a couple things that they could be looking at. They could be looking at Planted Explosives. They could be looking at another Rending or something else that could help deal damage. And they decide to put one in the bottom, keep one on top. Not exactly sure what the cards are. But I'm more likely guessing it's either going to be an Honorable Vanguard or something or other that doesn't help with the board state. And my opponents announced they're going to go ahead and swing 2 damage into the Hasty Messenger to get Hasty Messenger off the board where they're looking assailant. And this makes me think that they have a Planted Explosives or another way to deal with Arthur. Because Arthur and Monk be the way they want to get off the board. And they're going to go ahead and play a Crimson Tear and then swing into me for 2. So they're going to go ahead, pass the turn. At the end of their turn, I'm going to Creative Shock. And off the Creative Shock, we see a Korhazi Arsonist and an Ignited Stab. Knowing I don't have a Rending Flames in hand just yet, I go ahead and still discard the Ignited Stab because Korhazi Arsonist will let me deal with Crimson Tear, banishing so they don't stack their graveyard as much to sort of stack the Rending Flame damage that they could possibly have. So we are going to go ahead and go back to my turn, and from there we are going to recollect and we're debating our materialization and debating if we want to level up or do another method. Knowing that my opponent is on Fire Zander, I'm pretty much going to level up here, but it's also doing math at this point to see if there's a way I could push lethal or if I could survive an extra turn if I decide to not level up. But we decided to go to level up safe route. We do have the Honorable Vanguard to discard, get it out of my graveyard, put it into my banish zone, and then on enter, we're going to go ahead and glimpse with Zander. Off the glimpse, we see an Arthur, we see another Karazi Arsonist. We don't want either one of those. I'm just going to send us to the bottom because we already have one of each in our hand. And it's sort of just dead cards in the matchup. We're really looking for something to push damage. And we're going to go ahead, recollect, see another Hasty Messenger. So with the Hasty Messenger, it lets us filter out a couple more cards if we need to. And we're sort of needing to clear our opponent's board as well. Because the fact that we need to just start killing units. Otherwise, they're going to get in for free and they're going to go ahead and have a big explosive turns themselves. We don't need the Honorable Vanguard. We don't need the Arthur just yet because if we play Arthur, we won't have enough cards to play anything else. And we decided to go ahead and play the Korhazi Arsonist because this will leave us up enough to go ahead and play Hasty Messenger as well. And the Korhazi Arsonist that deals 2 will let us banish, say, their Crimson Tier on attack, which is something that is going to really help us to keep the fire cards out of the grave for something like Rending. So we are debating which one we don't like more, or shouldn't say, or we should say dislike more, either the Crimson Tier or the Lurking Scan. But we decide to go ahead, swing 2 with the Karazi Arsonist, and we're dealing to the Crimson Tier, that will banish. I'll remind my opponent, and we play Hazy Messenger, swinging for an extra 1 damage to put our opponent up to 5. So from here, we're going to go ahead and pass the turn. Nothing left in hand. We're going to look through Material Deck to see if there's a way we want to set this up for our next turn. I'm doing math at this point because we do have Rukin Soul Knife if we need to generate that, or if we can go ahead and get the Assassin's Ripper and have enough cards to also Rending and deal damage on top of it. We only have about 5 fire cards in our grave, so we can't just free generate the Korhazi Soul Knife just yet, and we also can't Rending Flame on top of it. So our opponent's going to go ahead, quick Silvergrail themselves, double check what they have underneath, and they're going to go ahead and recollect themselves with 5 cards in hand, and they're going to draw. So as I'm debating sort of what's going to happen next, I'm mostly just doing math in my head as much as possible, like what is more likely the chance that I have lethal in my hand. My opponent decides to go ahead, swing 2 into Lurking Assailant, and they're going to Lurking Assailant go ahead and deal 2, I should say, to Korhazi Arsonist, killing our Korhazi Arsonist, giving us the 6 cards that we need in our grave of fire cards, and also making me debate if there's a different type of math that we want to do to get lethal. And they are going to go ahead and swing 1 into Hasty Messenger. They're going to play Maniac Zealot, and then they announce that they're going to swing 1 into it. So there is going to be this little bit of delay, as you're noticing, between my camera and the webcam games. This is just due to just an overall delay. The webcam games, my camera does show my actions more than the webcam does show. So we're going to go ahead and flip over into Soul Knife, dagger into the end of my opponent's turn. Here I'm doing math. If I get Soul Knife, I can go ahead and deal about 9 damage to my opponent. They have no cards in hand with a Rending. That doesn't really generate enough damage to secure the game just yet. But we pop Soul Knife, pop Dagger anyway to leave a little bit of a threat on the board if we need to. And we're going to go ahead and draw for the turn. We grab the Terrafring just to limit their attacks a little bit. And I will say I did end up having a misplay here. I do end up playing my Arthur Immortal. And this is more than likely what's going to come back to bite me in the butt this game, where I think really caused a major misplay. Because of having the Terrafring, there might not have been a chance I didn't need to go Immortal because my opponent only is going to have about 5 cards in hand. And it's going to make him debate whether or not they want to push lethal. And this 2 damage later on is really going to come back to really determine a lot of different things later on. So we still decide to go ahead, like I said, pay our 3 down, pay our 4th card down, and play the Arthur. There's no point playing the Crimson Tier because the Crimson Tier will only get a trade. I should have, like I said, played the Arthur, kill a unit off their board. But instead I didn't, and that's what's going to come back and really bite me in the butt long term. As we, like I said, we go ahead and pop our Terrafring this turn as well, which we really didn't need to do. Our opponent is going to go ahead their turn, pop their Quicksilver, reveal their Poison Dagger on tap for the turn, and then they are going to go ahead and move to their Materialization. And they're going to go and grab, I'm pretty sure, a Terrafring of their own at this point, because knowing I have to pay 2 to swing in the lethal. and not having enough cards in hand. Sort of the same play mentality I did in this matchup, especially into this type of situation. So like I said, they're going to go ahead and generate Terrafring. And with that Terrafring, to go ahead and recollect, debating if I want to go ahead and pop my Terrafring in response to their recollection step. And this is where I'm debating doing math how much damage they have, knowing that if I don't pop Dagger, they could, I mean, if they don't pop Ring, they have Dagger for 1, Lurking Assailant will deal 3, total of 4. Honorable Exam does 2, total of 7. Maniac Zealot does 9. And then they could also kill Maniac Zealot, doing 3 damage, which would put me up to 12. Debating what else they have in hand, which is either going to be a Lurking Assailant. I mean, not Lurking Assailant, it could be a Planet Explosive, a Throw, or a Rending. There's a couple different cards it can have if I don't pop this Terrafring also to just deal lethal to the face. So I decided to go ahead and pop the Terrafring, and overall, I don't know if this was a misplay. I personally think it was, looking back on this game. I really shouldn't have played Arthur. Probably should have played something else instead, or at least not played Arthur Immortal and take something of theirs off the board. But they really have to commit more resources to deal with Arthur as a whole. And it just sort of was my punishment because of Arthur being on the board. They could pop their Terrafring next turn in their response and makes everything a little bit slower on my end, and I can't Rending either. So if I decided to get the attack in last turn, I could deal 7, put my opponent up to 7, and then Rending Flame can deal, like I said, another 4, 8, another 6, 7, 8, 9 damage, which would put my opponent close to a lethal range. 10 if you count the Poison Dagger itself. So my opponent would have been 2 off of lethal, and I could have drawn a number of things like a Mark to Target or anything of the sorts. I could just deal lethal and end the game. But my opponent goes ahead. They're going to go ahead and play Rococo. Rococo comes in, deals 2 damage to me, put me up to 4. Because on ability they only have 4 influence. And then they're debating whether or not, if they have any attacks, they're going to go ahead and decide to pass the turn because of the Terrafring that was popped. And then I'm going to go ahead and move into my attack phase. I'm going to go ahead and grab Fire Resonance Bauble because I knew if I have an extra card here, I can do something like Rending Flame and Mark to Target and have enough cards in hand for lethal or grabbing a Rococo. So like I said, just because it's late, my opponent did do the pop the Terrafring. I drew for the turn. And now I'm sitting there doing math, and I realize I don't have enough math to Rending Flames. If I just got in with the damage of Arthur and Arthur died this turn, then I could have easily just Rending Flame and Rococo, and I would have won this game easily. And it sort of just came back to really bite me in the long term. So here I am debating whether or not I want to attack or deal Rococo. I'm going to decide to pop the Fire Resonance Bauble to draw, get some extra cards, and there's also the Mark to Target. So if I attacked with Arthur, let Arthur die this turn, and pop, or I should say last turn, and pop the Terrafring just to prevent lethal damage done to myself, I probably would have won the game in this situation. And it really, like I said, just came back and bit me in the butt. And I think it's what pretty much cost me this entire game. So now I'm doing math. I could pretty much pay 2, attack if I want to. I can go ahead and pay 3 cards to pay for something or put something down and then swing to deal damage. It came to a lot of situations as I'm trying to do math if I can get 2 attacks in, and I can't. I can only play a card and attack with 1, or just attack 1 instead and leave cards in hand. And I pretty much just decide to pay 2. I don't need the Crimson Tier at this point. It doesn't do anything. Honorable Vanguard's just here for the floating. We're going to go ahead and pay 2. And I think we're going to go ahead and attack with Arthur, more likely into their Honorable Vanguard or their Rococo, just to clear off the board. And I decided, I'm pretty sure I'm going to attack the Rococo here because of the fact that if I give them an Honorable Vanguard, they could Assassin Ripper. And yeah, this is where I asked them how many fire cards you have, trying to play around the Rending Flames. I attack Rococo, I'll give them Rending Flames damage. And I go ahead and I swing 2. I said, I'm pretty sure into Rococo. But might be Honorable Vanguard because of the fact, or sorry. So let's see. So 2 damage is dealt to Arthur in retaliation. They mark the target Arthur. Arthur dies. They gain a prep counter. And I think, what did I deal 2 to? I deal 2 to face? Yeah, I dealt 2 to face instead. I said, I dealt 2 to face. I didn't want to give them the cards, and this is where it all sort of punished me in the long run, because they're going to go ahead and set up their lethal turn here, and it's pretty much just going to die. They get their Assassin Ripper, they banish a card, and they have pretty much 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. They have about 16 damage on board, and I can't do anything really too much about it outside of maybe mark to targeting something to prevent damage coming through. So my opponent goes and banish card. They're going to banish the Karhazi Courier. The Karhazi Courier, they're going to pop the Poison Dagger to deal 1 to me. And in response to activation, I think I'm debating whether I want to kill a card in response because I'm doing math of how much damage can actually be dealt on board. And if I mark the target Rogoku, will prevent 2 less damage. And I'm trying to see if that even matters in this situation. Killing Rogoku will, like I said, prevent 2 damage. And I can't kill the main exile because the main exile will also deal 2 to me. Technically 3 if we're using the dagger activation. So I'm heavily debating what could be used. I don't think there's much of an out I have here. I could also poison dagger in response, targeting, say, the maniac zealot, and then killing Rococo with my mark to target. But at this point, I'm losing my own lethal off the board. It doesn't really benefit me too much. So I'm going to go ahead and cast the mark to target, gaining a prep counter because of the class the assassin bonus activation effect. And I'm going to deal 1 to Rococo. And I took 5 off of the mark to target, off of the dagger. So then on a Vanguard swings it for 7. I'm going to swing his maniac zealot for another 2 to put me up to 9. Sorry, the Honorable Vanguard will put me up, the Lurking Seal will put me up to 10. And then I'll be put up to 12 off of the Maniac Zealot here. And then they just go ahead and Assassin Rippers my face for, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Or 4, sorry. Put me up to 16. And then a simple mark to target or anything of the sort will do it, or applied to explosives. And my opponent goes ahead and pays 2 for a blazing throw. Plays 1 for a blazing throw instead. And pretty much puts me into lethal range. And we go ahead and look into sideboarding here for game number 2. So we go ahead and move on to game number 2 here. I go ahead and decide to go first in this matchup. In my sideboard, I decided not to bring in Savaging Raccoons. I feel like it's going to be too slow for going first into the mirror. And then on top of that, I pretty much didn't bring in too much. I brought in a Safeguard Amulet in case it mattered for like a Blazing Throw. But there wasn't too much otherwise I had set up for this mirror matchup. And going first, I decided to go ahead and set up with an Archer on turn 1 again. I had a double Karhazi Arsonist, Karhazi Courier, which didn't do too much to me just yet because I couldn't attack. And I passed it over to my opponent as they go ahead and draw their initial 7 and draw their 1 extra for the first card for the turn, generating their Spirit of Fire. In my head in this game, I should have mentally reset, and I really didn't. And I think this what also bites me in the butt this game in my decision making, being the first game of the day. I could have done a couple of things better, and I really just didn't. I think probably a Karhazi Courier would have been fine here because it had stealth. It didn't do anything otherwise. There's no need to set up the Arthur just yet. There wasn't anything I needed to push lethal on, as my opponent sets Arthur up first as well for their turn, putting it in tapped, and they have 3 cards up, and they're going to go ahead and pass. We decided to grab All Reliable here with the Quicksilver Grail and the Dagger. Set my opponent up to level first if they need to. And we go ahead and recollect and draw for the turn. So we have Creative Shot, Clumsy, double mark to target, and we draw another Arthur off the top and a Blazing Throw. So not really the best hand that we're looking for at this point. So this is where it would have been better for me to play the Arthur later on because their Arthur could just get in for 2 damage or something else to kill my Arthur this turn, which isn't really ideal. And if I set up this Karhazi Courier a turn earlier, I could have just dealt 2 damage here sooner. But setting up the early Arthur also let me push no extra damage as well. So really it was just a mistake on my part of just not playing Courier first, which would have been the smarter play. We go ahead and swing 2 at face with the Arthur because we can, and then we swing Karhazi Courier for 1. And my opponent decides to go ahead and plant the explosives, the Karhazi Courier, not prep the 2 to kill Courier. And we go ahead and pass the turn. So this is where, like I said, I stated that we're pretty much Arthur just has the chance to die at this point. If we brought him in this turn immortal, we could have just pushed to 2. We would have gotten in 2 less damage because of Karhazi Arsonist, but that's fine. The plane explosives could also win differently, but I think overall that was the wrong play. My opponent go ahead is asked me to banish a card. We banish their own Karhazi Courier as they level up to level 1 Zander and begin their glimpse 2 off the top. We had double mark turn hand and Creative Shock. I left it like this because of the fact that I like to leave the duplicate cards in my hand, especially for Creative Shock. I don't feel as bad ditching one. if I have better targets that I like to keep if off my greatest shock draws. It lets me also set up a couple other things to look at. Clumsy was a dead card in this game, so leveling off of a Clumsy Apprentice doesn't really bother me too much as a whole. And like I said, this leaves a couple different options up open as a whole. The opponent's going to go ahead and pay 3. I think they're debating, I think Carly Arsonist or Crimson. So they go ahead and deal with the Crimson Tier. They're level 1. So this Crimson Tier goes ahead and just cleans up my Arthur for 3. Pretty much gets in uncontested because the fact it has the level 1 bonus. Then they deal 2 to face with their own Arthur to me. Now looking at my hand, I don't have too many ways to deal with either one right now. I'm going to go ahead and level, but I have a Mark to Target, deal with Mark to Target, Create a Shock, a Blazing Throw, and a Clumsy Apprentice, and it doesn't really get me anything to deal with either one of their units on board. And my opponent deals 4. So they roll 4. Blazing Throw is going to get banished. Doesn't really affect me too much. It's just a little bit of extra damage, but nothing really hurts. We go ahead, enter Glimpse 2, double Ignited Stab. We keep 1 on top, send 1 to the bottom. At this point, I'm debating if I can Ignited Stab something away if I really needed to, or go ahead and push damage. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to recollect. And then looking at my hand, we do have a Clumsy Apprentice, which still isn't warranted of anything. So we use the pay down. We play the Creative Shutdown in the Mark to Target because I don't really need either one. We play our Arthur. And I think we're debating whether or not we want to go tapped or untapped. And we go ahead and play Tapped Immortal, which is also, I think, a mistake. They're just going to get about 7 damage here uncontested into my face. And there's not much I could do about it. I needed to clear that clumsy Crimson Tier off the board, and I just couldn't. So they're going to go ahead and set up with Grail as their own, with, I'm pretty sure, a Poison Dagger underneath, setting up their turn for lethal next turn, as they're going to go ahead and push 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6 damage into my face of just Arthur and Crimson Tier alone, putting me up to 13. And it really just puts me on the back foot, as any form of combination of cards just kills me. They could even just Rending Flame this turn, and I think it almost puts me at lethal. It puts me at 6, but they don't have enough fire cards in graveyard, thankfully, to push that amount of damage. So I'm not too exact worried, but I know next turn I'm going to be pretty behind. So opponent goes and swings 2 into me with their Arthur. They're going to go ahead and swing 4 here because of they get 2 off of Crimson Tier, plus 1 off of Arthur, and another 1 off of Crimson Tier's level 1 ability, where Crimson Tier deals an extra +1 attack to any human unit. Opponent decides to go ahead and create a shock, draw 2 cards, or put a fire card in their grave. And this is what tells me they're probably setting up for Rending or looking for some form of lethal this turn, as they put the Maniac Zealot back, and they have 3 cards in hand. Nothing much else to do. They could Clumsy if they wanted to push an extra 2 damage if they have it, but I don't think they're in the position where they're forced to just push Clumsy damage into my face. I'm going to go ahead and pop Dagger here just to prep it. It's going to let me respond to something if I really need to. And we're going to go ahead and go to my Recollection Step. I'm going to grab a Fire Bobble and crack it pre-rec, as we're going to go ahead and just fish for damage. I know I have a possibility of lethal in my hand, depending on what my opponent has. And I just sort of got to rip it. I know I'm dead next turn as I'm doing the math. I have a Rending Flame. I have an Arthur. I have a Kahazi Courier in hand as well that lets me draw another card and discard, as well as a Clumsy Apprentice and an Ignited Stab. Like, I have a lot of cards here that does damage. So there's 1 off of Dagger. Ignited Stab will deal 5. Mark to Target is 7. Arthur is 8, 9. And another unit could be like 10, 11 with something like Clumsy, push me up to 13. And then I think I also have Kahazi Courier, like I said, in hand if it's set of Clumsy, so I'll be another 2 damage push up to 15, and another Mark to Target. So I definitely have a line of lethal here, depending on what happens. So I decided to go ahead and pop the Dagger, and I'm going to pay 1 to mark to target my opponent, dealing an extra 2 damage, gain a prep counter, lets me use Ignited Stab, prepped if I need to, I recollect and draw for the turn. I draw into a Crimson Tier, which I go, okay, this really, a Rococo, which really just secures lethal possibility. So I go ahead and try to swing 3, and my opponent does have the Plant Explosives to kill my Arthur. So they kill Arthur. Arthur will die here with nothing to do. And I'm sitting there going, oof. Like, I really went all in this attack and ended up really punishing me. Especially now I'm sitting there looking at my damage and like, how well can I push lethal here? Like, I could banish 3, I could Rending Flame, but we decided to banish 3. Grab the Soul Knife. Soul lets me push an extra damage here off of the Ignited Stab, because the Ignited Stab will also pitch a card on my hand and leave my hand open to do others to Rococo for extra bit of damage here. So I'm still doing my math, trying to do a lot of card math in my hand, in my head, and damage math, and I think every time I end up being like one short of lethal. So I decide to pay the one. So I'm pretty sure I just Ignited Stab. Not really much. Actually, no, I don't Ignite Stab yet because I'm debating if I can Rending Flame instead if I don't use the Ignited Stab here. But there wasn't really much I can do because I won't have enough to Rococo to hit the influence level for that. So it's pretty much not a lot. Not a lot of possibilities, pretty much. And it's just, like I said, makes everything a really awkward situation as a whole. But so I'm pretty sure I'm going to go ahead and still Ignited Stab here, pushing 5 damage, technically 6 because of the dagger. So we deal 6 into my opponent. And I go ahead, banish that. And there could have been the argument here where I could have just pushed damage into my opponent's board state to just kill everything off the board. But I knew I was still dead as a whole if I didn't. I knew just something like a Rending Flame with a dagger would kill me. There's just too many situations where I was just dead. And I Rokugo for 3. I swing more in for 17. Oh, sorry, 18. And that's where I knew I was 1 damage off, and there wasn't much else for me to do at this point. And I knew my opponent lethal. If I cleared the board here, I could have maybe killed like something like Crimson Arthur with the stab, and then maybe marked a target Rococo for something if I wanted to. But I really just went down on cards, and I wouldn't have really been in a position to recover. And it's not, like I said, here I am. I'm doing math. Seeing my opponent just has it. Let's just show me lethal. I pretty much assume they do because they grab the Sword of Seeking, and they're going to go ahead and dagger me for 1. Take the 1, go up to 9. Arthur swings in for 3, put me up to 12. And then they are going to swing Crimson Tear for about a total of 6, put me up to 18, and they just swing with Sword here to put me up to 17. I mean, lethal. And that was sort of that. There wasn't really much else for me to do in the situation. It was sort of just a rough situation as a whole. I start the tournament down 0-1, losing 2 games, and we pretty much just go ahead and look into the next one, hoping to start off with a better record and go 1-1.